I've always thought that that a lot of people misunderstand power. That there's two ways to exercise power. You can exercise it in a positive way, or it can be a negative way, a punishment way. And I've always thought too many people think the only way to really show they have power is to punish somebody.
Hello, I'm Frank Schultz. I'm a reporter with the Janesville Gazette. I'm sitting here with Senator Tim Cullen, who is retiring after many years in politics, also in private business. We're going to talk about all that and take a look back at his career. Can you tell me a little bit about your family? I take it there weren't a lot of lawyers or captains of industry in your branch of the Cullen family?
No, there wasn't. There was fortunately some brains, and maybe I inherited a few of them, but my father never finished 10th grade because at that time he was the oldest in the family, and his dad, my grandfather, was a janitor in the school district. In fact, was the first janitor at Roosevelt School when it opened in 1930, and was a janitor there for 21 years. So, and there were 4 kids, so that's not a big income. And so what was really not unusual in those days was the oldest son, usually the oldest son, and probably in some case the oldest daughter, but the oldest son quit school and went to work to help support the family, and that's what my father did. And my mother had gone to 1 year of what I think they call a bookkeeping school, or Janesville Business School, I think it was, for 1 year, and she worked as a bookkeeper in some office as part-time after my brother and I were in school. But no, I didn't. There was no wealth in the family, but my parents were terrific parents with a lot of brains too, both of them.
You went to UW-Whitewater, graduated with a degree in poli-sci, right? Political
Yes.
science?
Yep.
Did you always want to go into politics? Was that your goal from, when did that start?
Well, that's a very good question, because Milwaukee Journal did a story when I retired from Blue Cross in '07, and they entitled the story "An Unplanned Life." And it recounted a lot of my life had been up till then, in public life anyway. And that really describes it. It was unplanned. I mean, I love government, and I was interested in politics. My father was worked at the plant, never finished 10th grade, but smartest guy I've ever known. But he liked politics. He used to talk to me about Harry Truman. I can remember telling me about Harry Truman when I was growing up. And I got a degree in political science, and I was in the political science club at Whitewater. But I never had any expectation I would ever be elected to anything. It happened in my family. I didn't know a reason to believe I was going to. So I had no plans like that. I didn't know. I just knew I really liked government and politics. And then I came back to Janesville and ran for the city council and liked that a lot. And then
you lost the first time.
Lost the first time, yeah, which was in 1969, and then won in 1970. And then in 1970, I met Les Aspin, who was running for Congress the first time, and I had no reason to believe he would ever be interested in hiring me. I had no expectation whatsoever. And after he won, he asked me if I would come and work on his staff. And that was really one of the big breaks in my life, frankly, to know Les Aspin and work for Les Aspin. Gave me an opportunity to learn about government from the inside, kind of, and even though it was at the federal level. And then this opportunity came to run for the state senate in '74, which I never intended to do either, by the way. There was a woman from Beloit, Kay Gretzner, who was on the city council there, and she was going to run for the state senate. And remembering that all of Beloit was in the district, but only one ward in Janesville. And I was going to support her, and no intention of running. And then sort of late in terms of announcing, it was somewhere in April of '74, she announced that she was not going to run for the state senate. And so I thought, well, I'll do that. And so I really got in sort of late, at least by today's standards. I don't think I got into the race until officially, I think, till late May or early June.
You were elected to the Senate twice.
Yeah.
And there was a 24-year period in between during which you were not up in the legislature. Yeah. So the first time was 1974. You were 30 years old.
Yeah.
You had served one term on the Janesville City Council, and Boy, 30 years old. Was that young for a senator back then, or?
It was certainly on the young side, although I went back and looked in 1974, which was 40 years ago, when I was first elected, there were 6 new Democratic state senators who were elected that fall. And all 6 of us were under age 35. So it wasn't that unusual. I don't know that anybody was in their 20s, but everybody was like between 30 and 35.
Someone said that 74 was a big year because Watergate had just happened and the Democrats gained because of that. That was helpful.
There's no question about that. It was a huge landslide Democratic year. We've seen some big Republican years too. But no question the whole year of Watergate, and there was sort of a hangover against the Vietnam War and so on. It was a big Democratic year, and I might not have won had it not been, because the district that I was elected in, that 15th district is very different than today. It only had 1 ward in Janesville, for example, and it went all over, and it went over and had all of Beloit, but then covered almost all of Walworth County. And then it went over into western Racine County, which was very Republican leaning as well. So a lot of things broke right that year for me to have a chance to win that time.
Did the Democrats control everything at that point then? The assembly, the governor, or I don't remember who was governor.
Well, Patrick Lucy was governor, and
so he was a Democrat.
So that year, when the year that I won, was elected, was the Democrats took over the state Senate that year for the first time in 82 years. The Senate,
wow.
The Democrats had not been in control of the Senate since 1892, and then that gave the Democrats complete control. They already had, going into the election, the governorship, and Governor Pat Lucy was reelected that year, and the assembly was already Democratic.
Okay, and some years later, you became the majority leader of the Senate, which is the top job in the Senate, and some would say, at least at that point, it was maybe the second most powerful person in the state after the governor, politically. Did you work hard to get that, or is that something you wanted? Did they force it on you?
No, I don't think that job ever gets forced on anybody. No, I wanted it and went after it. What had happened was that Bill Bablich, who had been the majority leader, resigned from the majority leader's job because he was running for the Supreme Court, which he eventually won. And so that opened up the opportunity, and I had been working with my colleagues. I'd been going out and visiting their districts and campaigning with them and going to their fundraisers and stuff like that. So I'd been working towards it for at least 2 years, and it's a job that you have to seek, and I wanted it. Unfortunately, my caucus elected me. So
you were known as a guy who was very serious and got things done. What were a couple big issues that you worked on that in which you feel good about something that got accomplished during that time?
Well, first of all, I must say that I think of all the jobs I've had in my life, I think I loved being majority leader more than anything. And because it was a chance to make a difference. You were involved in legislation that was going to pass, you know. But you know, we had a huge problem with the unemployment compensation system. It was way in debt, and we had to figure out a way to balance the budget. We owed the federal government $750 million, as I recall, and working that out in a bipartisan way. The governor asked the 2 Democratic leaders, which was Speaker Loftus and myself from the Senate, and then the minority leaders of the 2 houses, and the Assembly minority leader at the time was a guy by the fellow by the name of Tommy Thompson, which people heard more about later on.
Yeah.
And Susan Engelhardt, she was this Republican minority leader. So the 4 of us had to work out a way to fix that fund to get it back in balance. And of course, by the governor, which I thought was a brilliant move in his part, by putting 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans at the table, it forced it to be a compromise. Because you couldn't have just a Democratic solution or a Republican solution. And working that out was really enjoyable, and it's I think a great way for the government to operate. But and the Governor Earl didn't have to do that. We had control of both houses and the governorship. He could have just shut the Republicans out, and we could have figured out a Democratic solution. But he didn't do it. But that's sort of the difference between that time and this time. And then helping him pass the governor's agenda was a big part of it. We had big fights over establishing a lottery. Big issues were establishing a lottery.
Oh, you're responsible for the lottery.
I voted against it.
Did you?
Actually, it passed. I don't know, 25-8 or something like that. But it's not that I'm against gambling. I just didn't think the government ought to run a gambling operation. That was how I saw it. So I voted against it. It also was a big issue over raising the drinking age, which that was a big deal. And it went from this organization called Mothers Against Drunk Driving had been formed, and it was 18. The drinking age was 18.
Yep.
It was all, the voting age was 18. It was all sort of a reaction to the Vietnam War, that if 18-year-olds could be sent off to war to die, they ought to be able to drink and vote.
Right.
That was sort of how it got to be 18. And then there was all this movement because of so many kids, 18, 19, 20, were being killed in drunk driving related situations. And so we raised it from 18 to 19, which in 19 I thought was the right age, frankly. I think I still do today. It kind of gets it out of high school. 19-year-olds are in college, they're in the workplace, they're in the military, whatever. But we went from 18 to 19, and then there was the movement then was to go to 21. And the federal government said if you don't go to 21, we'll cut off some federal highway funds.
Right. I think everyone had to go to 21 then.
Yeah.
Nationwide.
So we went to 21, which I voted against, by the way. Again, I was in a minority. Passed overwhelmingly because I thought 19 was the best answer. So there were different issues today. People today would go, what? That's a long time ago.
Well, that affects us yet today. So people will take interest in that, I'm sure.
In fact, I can digress for a second. The newspaper prints and still does today that people were arrested for drunk driving.
Yes.
And so I had a staff person go down to the library and go through one whole year of the Gazettes, not looking for names of people who were arrested, but ages. And he did that for one whole year. And what we found was that the drunk driving arrests, now that's not the same as people dying in a drunk driving related accident, this is just arrests. Yeah. And what it showed was that there were, almost none at 17 or 16, and it ramped up considerably up to 20, and it peaked at about 20, which sort of made the case for going to 21, except that it didn't go down considerably until age 27. 22 was not as high as 21, but pretty high. 23 was high. 24. It was only at 27, which sort of probably coincides with people getting married and settling down or whatever.
Right.
So it was facetious, but it was serious in the sense I was trying to make a point that if we were really serious, if we thought raising the drinking age was a solution to drunk driving, we should raise the drinking age to 27, which of course no politician who wanted to get reelected was ever going to support. So I introduced an amendment to do that and withdrew and made the point and withdrew it because it wasn't going to happen. But I mean, I was trying to make the connection, that if age is the issue, then we shouldn't be stopping at 21. But they went to 21.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly when this happened, but I understand that maybe when you were majority leader, this Prince of Darkness thing came out. People who maybe didn't like your politics or what you were doing, took to calling you the Prince of Darkness. And I assume for your hardball style of getting things done, or what was that all about?
Well, first of all, I never thought it was a term of endearment. I never thought it was a plus for me.
No.
But the thing was, it was said anonymously.
Uh-huh.
It was said in a Milwaukee magazine article by some unnamed person. So, but I've talked to friends who've said, well, what they thought it meant was, I think they were being kind to me, but they thought it meant was that there seemed to be problems that couldn't get worked out in the Senate, and sort of out of the darkness, the next day I would have a solution. So I was Prince of Darkness. I somehow found a solution to problems and came up with them. I think that's being pretty kind, I think. Whoever said it, and I don't have any idea who it was. I don't think they intended it to be. But every time when you're majority leader, then or now, most days you're making a decision to make somebody happy and somebody unhappy. So you do that for a few years. You've got a lot of people that are unhappy with decisions you've made. Some people are like it. So it's not hard to find somebody who would say something like that after a few years, especially if they can say it anonymously.
Did you, I mean, if someone who crossed you, did you like give them a smaller office or do punishments like that?
I never did any of that stuff. In fact, my goal, it sort of got to be now in the caucuses that the majority leader, you get to be majority leader by getting a majority of the caucus, sometimes a very slim majority. And then that affects your attitude towards the rest of the people on your party. Senator Babbich's strategy and mine was to try to keep everybody in the tent, everybody happy. And I had, for example, some pretty conservative Democratic state senators in my caucus. Probably the most conservative one was Marv Rochelle from Chippewa Falls. My attitude was I didn't care how they voted. It was up to them, and I wasn't had any reason to punish them. I cared that they voted for me for majority leader, but after they did that, I think how they actually voted on an issue was up to them and their district. In fact, he was the most conservative one, and I remember going. I went up there and campaigned for him. I went up there to his fundraisers. I've always thought that that a lot of people misunderstand power. That there's two ways to exercise power. You can exercise it in a positive way, or it can be a negative way, a punishment way. And I've always thought too many people think the only way to really show they have power is to punish somebody, take them off a committee or whatever. Yet I always thought that you could exercise power in a positive way by suggesting that somebody be the lead person on an issue rather than me being the lead person on an issue. Try to make sure everybody in the caucus had a committee assignment that was reasonable and related to what they cared about, and spread it around so that in different chairmanships and who got on the building commission and who was on the transportation commission and so on, and make sure that also was geographically fair, that we didn't overload the power positions with people from Madison and Milwaukee, for example. We made sure it was all over the state. So that's not the way I operated. I don't know if there are people who didn't like what I decided might have thought differently, but
4 years in the Senate now, in this your latest foray into the Senate.
And last time.
Yes. So let's make this clear. You're not going to run for elective office again, right?
That's it. This is it.
All right.
No hedging. This is it.
Okay. Talk to me about the differences in how things are done, how legislation is made in the 70s and 80s versus here in this decade.
Well, there's a lot of things. One of the primary things, which I don't think ever gets talked about, is that the parties then had among the Democratic senators, there were 3 or 4 very conservative Democratic senators who probably could have run as a Republican and fit in. And the Republican caucus, they had the same thing. They had 3 or 4 Republican senators who were pretty moderate to almost liberal, whatever word you want to use, but pretty moderate. And so then the parties sort of self-police themselves. In other words, I couldn't find 17, if I wanted to, I couldn't find 17, which is the majority. I couldn't find 17 votes in my caucus to do something way to the left, because votes weren't there because of these very conservative senators. And had the Republicans been in the majority, they had the same problem. And so in a sense, we sort of self-policed ourselves. So even if a bill passed with only Democratic votes, for example, it was not going to be something far to the left because there weren't the votes in the caucus to do it. So that's one thing that was different. Today, the Democratic caucus is pretty much to the left of center, and the Republican caucus is significantly to the right of center. So there isn't that self-policing thing going on today. The amount of money and the sources of the money and the fact that a lot of it's hidden is all extremely different today. For example, my first campaign I ran on $13,000 to win. And even with inflation, maybe that's $100,000 today. I don't know what it is. And outside groups did not spend significant amounts of money at all. and they certainly weren't from out of state. The outside groups were State Chamber of Commerce, the Teachers Union, Wisconsin groups. You go from those dollars under 100,000, whatever. Since I've been up there, there have been $6 million, $8 million, and $10 million state senate races in Wisconsin. Think about, $6, $8, $10 million. I mean, that's a huge thing that's changed. Other thing that's changed is that leadership now, all the campaigns are centralized and run out of Madison by the leaders of the two parties. Both parties do it the same. Back in the 70s and 80s, the senators, candidates ran their own campaigns. It wasn't that Madison wasn't involved a little bit, but the senators ran their own campaigns, raised their own money. Now with these huge amounts of money needed, leadership is raising the big amounts of money and talking to the groups that have outside money to spend. And what that means is that by the time a senator or representative gets to Madison, in most cases, they owe a lot to their leadership because they not only raise the money for them, the big money, and arrange for the big money to be spent on their behalf. They provide staff to come down and running campaigns. They do all kinds of write the releases for them, press releases, everything.
What about making a compromise, getting enough people on both sides to agree to something? No,
Well,
actually, they don't need that right now.
They don't need it. If one party controls the whole process, both houses in the governorship, if there's going to be a compromise, the majority party has to want it to happen because they don't need
Right.
Democratic votes. They have to want them for some other reason other than that they need the votes. And these people are in charge now have no interest in working with the Democrats. And so I can say I'd like to work with them, but that doesn't matter. What matters is they've got to want to work with the minority, and these people have not wanted to. Now, in fairness, the Democrats had complete control in 2009 and 2010 and didn't involve the Republicans in much at all. And in some ways paid for it in the 2010 elections.